what would like a training cycle, like let's just say if over a whole year, like what would that look like in terms of hypertrophy training, strength training? Like could you, like when would you insert a strength training cycle, or could you just do hypertrophy the whole time? Like what was even the point of doing a strength cycle? Like can you talk about that?
Yeah, so we're assuming in this case that the goal is just to improve your physique and look better.
Sure.
For the most part.
Yeah.
Um,
And functionally strong, like just be able to do shit and not fall
play
apart.
with your kids, and totally.
Yeah.
So the way I kind of look at this now, and my opinion is kind of shifted slightly over the last few years, but I think that ultimately the reason that you would use a strength and then ultimately possibly a metabolic cycle in the periodized year would really be because you're reaching a stop a what's the word I'm looking for, a block in your hypertrophy training. So you're going through many hypertrophy cycles in a row. Say you've done 18 weeks, because we just finished up an 18-week hypertrophy cycle at Paragon. Say you just your progress is slowing. We have this hypertrophy is a stimulus that you can adapt to, and if you adapt to a point, you kind of have to jump out of hypertrophy to resensitize, and that is fringe science. But I think a good analogy that people can understand is sun exposure. So like when you go out into the sun the first time after the winter, you get burnt. Like you go out in the sun for 20 minutes even, and you're just like, whoa, what happened?
Crispy bacon, crispy bacon strips.
Yeah, but if you go out in the sun every day for like 7 straight days, your skin becomes much darker, and now you need more sun exposure to be able to continue to get tanner, right? And then eventually you reach a point where your body is just like, hey, this is as tan as I get. Like I can't get any more tan. And so if we think of hypertrophy similarly, it's kind of the same idea. Like you have to continuously increase the stimulus that you're applying to the body via progressive overload. And at some point, that's just gonna stop. Like you can't continue adding weight and reps forever, or else you would be like squatting 1,000 pounds in your 10th year of training.
Well, yeah, your body probably just couldn't handle it at that point, like the fatigue wise, right?
Yeah, totally. So one other facet of hypertrophy is that you have to train a little bit closer to failure. When we're talking about training strength, you really don't have to be close to failure for 2 reasons, really. One, because the movements are so demanding. They extend at 3 joints, like I was saying. They're so fatiguing. But also because you're trying to coordinate all of these complex things at the same time. And if you were to, say, do a deadlift to failure, like you guys have both done this, you do a deadlift that is like the last deadlift you can do, and you can feel it. You know that there's some weird compensation shit happening. You're like, oh, that wasn't exactly what I was trying to do.
Twinge in your back a little bit, that little twinge.
Yeah, or like your back turns into a question mark, and you're like, my glutes and hamstrings aren't working anymore.
Shaking like a goddamn.
Holding like a taco.
So as we try to pursue this increased efficiency in these strength lifts, we don't want to be super close to failure. So kind of going back to the idea of periodizing the year, if you get to that point where hypertrophy is just becoming this kind of daunting task, and this may even occur psychologically before it occurs physiologically. That's what I've noticed with myself is like I can still be progressing my hypertrophy movements, but I just reach a point where I just don't want to do it anymore. And so it's going to be one of those two. Either psychologically, you don't want to do it anymore and you just want a change, or physiologically, your body's like, nope, no more sun exposure. Like you're as dark as you're going to get. So what do you do when you can't get any darker in the sun? Well, you can take some time off of the sun. And then when you go back into it, you're super sensitive to the sun again, right? Same idea can be applied to periodization of training, where if we jump out of hypertrophy for a short period of time and we do some strength work, well, what we've done is we've stopped working in the 6 to 15 rep range. So now we're working in the 1 to 6 rep range. So we have a little bit of resensitization to rep ranges. Strength training is also lower volume. So you're doing less work. So you're resensitizing to volume. And then, what was the other thing? Oh yeah. So we also use something in our Paragon programs on certain types of movements that are like partial reps, essentially, where you take like a movement like here's a perfect example, a bicep curl. Everyone understands bicep curl. So at the bottom of a bicep curl, your bicep is long, it's lengthened, right? It's stretched. And then as you flex your arm up, you can actually feel and see your bicep getting shorter. And so in movements like a bicep curl, what you guys find is that the top of that movement is really, really hard, but the bottom of the movement is not that hard. And so we use things at Paragon to emphasize the range of the motion that isn't hard. So like that bottom portion of the bicep curl, there's a whole ton of good stuff that can happen there. But when you're so limited by what's happening at the top of the rep, it's difficult to actually work the bottom position to proper levels of fatigue. So that's another thing that when we go into strength cycles, we don't do stuff like that. Another thing we don't really do as much in strength cycles is even use isolation movements. So we have this like 4-pronged approach to resensitizing to hypertrophy. And so for psychological or physiological reasons, both really solid reasons to kind of jump out of hypertrophy, do a short strength cycle, get reinvigorated, resensitized, and then kind of jump back into hypertrophy and keep working toward the goal.
Well, and I feel like for most people, it's like, I feel like the number one thing we see especially is it's like people, it's not that people are really like plateauing in their hypertrophy, endeavors and stuff like that. It's like really what's happening is like people just get bored. It's like, hey, after doing 2 or 3 hypertrophy cycles, back to back to back, it's like, it's a lot of counting. It's higher reps. Like you said, it's like the training just is different. It's a little bit more of a burn. It's a different type of pain or a different type of discomfort than, strength training is like, well, if you're only doing 3 reps, you're doing 3 reps, right? That's like, well, if you're doing 12, 13, 14, 15 reps. So it's like, definitely, it's like, I feel like that's the biggest thing is it's like people are about hypertrophy and muscle building training, but it does, it can get stale. It can get a little boring. And so I think we do a really good job at Paragon of inserting regular strength cycles as, again, it's just something to pivot. You get a fresh breath of air, and then you can get back towards the things that maybe are more in line with your personal goals of, hey, I want to look a certain way, or, I'm chasing fat loss, or, whatever it is there.